Thanks so much, Patrick. So now we have a good foundation of how forests are connected to the health of the Great Lakes and what some of the threats are to our forests. So let's get a broader view now and more of a national forestry perspective. Joining me now is Bill Banzhaf. He's a former president of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. Bill, thanks so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, Christy. It's great to have a chance to talk about something I love.
So we've been listening to these conversations, but I think what struck me most when I was watching you watch some of the video and I said, the footage is absolutely glorious. And you said you've been working in those forests for how many years?
Well, I hate to tell you, but it's been 40 years, which tells you I've got a lot of experience. It also tells you I'm old. So,
well, we won't be keeping track. We won't be doing any age keeping track here.
I started working in those forests in 1967 and all throughout the Lake States, Pacific Northwest, and then had an opportunity to go into Washington and actually head up the Professional Society for Forestry that actually accredits all the forestry schools around the country.
All right, so let me ask you, what change have you seen in those years?
Well, and I actually am fortunate to be able to go a lot further back than that, in that my family connection, my father got his forestry degree in 1922 from the University of Michigan, and he actually spent his first part of his career in the Upper Peninsula in the 1920s, where US 2 was a single-lane sand road, and all he saw around him were cut over, burned over forests. So that what that really leads to is that the early part of the forestry profession was focused on going back and trying to essentially heal some of the land that had been harvested in a way that was not sustainable. So he was involved in a lot of tree planting, in a lot of development of the early forest management plans. From there, and I think John mentioned it earlier, the real driver was the post-World War II economy and what forestry did to help supply the needs of our society at that point. In the early 60s, we saw the Multiple Use Sustained Yield Act, a federal act that really began to shift things to a more holistic viewpoint. And then, of course, I would say in the early 90s, we really began to look at forests from a systems, holistic viewpoint as ecosystems, which is truly appropriate.
So how would you say the Great Lakes forests are viewed on a national perspective?
Well, certainly, and I'm biased in that I live here and know the value of those forests in terms of both the strength to the economy, but in my mind, the immense value it has for the quality of the Great Lakes, which is an issue that is emerging to be more important every day.
And do we need to educate people more on what the forests actually do to help out the lakes?
Well, I think so, Christy, and actually, I might say that in my mind, there isn't enough awareness of the forestry issues that we face. We have a very complicated world. People in urban areas are worried about their family economy. We're worried about international issues. Programs like this can really help inform people so that we can do a better job and get more people involved in the sustainability of our forest resources.
So we talk about the forests in terms of economic drivers. We also talk about the recreation, the quality of life, the conservation. Have we stopped thinking about those things in silos? Are we starting to think about them more as all of those things, not just individual things?
And that's really the great part of the evolution of the forestry profession. Certification is an example of that, in that certification requires a look at the social issues, the environmental issues, and the economic issues. When we talk about auditing a forest certification system, we're talking about actual people from audit firms who are foresters, wildlife, fisheries biologists, ecologists, who actually go on the land from organizations like PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, and take a look to see that those forests are being managed in accordance with the principles that are involved in those forest certification systems. So forest certification demands that we look at forests from a holistic viewpoint.
So that job description has really changed then in the number of years.
It has, it has.
All right, let's talk a little bit about, they touched on how a lot of the land is privately owned, a lot of our forests are, and then you have the federal government, and then you have the state governments. How do we get all three of those groups to work on the same agenda, or is there still problems with that?
Well, there are problems, and my sense is that based on the human condition, there will probably always be problems in that. In terms of, we can focus a coordinated effort, certification being an example, with the industrial sector, with the federal and state folks, trying to coordinate family forest owners, miscellaneous non-industrial private forest landowners to focus in one area is almost impossible, and frankly, I'm not sure it's a good thing. Because what we're seeing...
Why not? Because people would say, isn't that what you want to do, is to make sure that everybody is on the same page? It's surprising maybe to hear you say that.
Well, it's because the diversity of landowner objectives that we have from various small family forest owners creates diversity in the landscape. Some people care about forestry as producing perhaps income to send their children to college. Others might want to produce it for wildlife habitat. Others simply want to see a healthy ecosystem that they can pass on to their children. So when we have that diversity of objectives, it creates a diverse landscape.
Do we need to raise the national profile of our Great Lakes forests? What would be, I guess, the benefit from that? Would there be economic benefit?
Well, no question. I think that the Great Lakes offers an incredible place to live and to work. And I think that so many times we look to the Pacific Northwest as the beautiful forested area, where our Great Lakes forests provide some of the most magnificent areas to view, to recreate, and to provide for the economy, which helps to maintain the social stability of our small rural towns. In northern Michigan, Wisconsin, we really need to look at that. That's one of the things that I'm concerned about in the future.
And who would be leading the charge on that, do you think?
Well, I think that what we hopefully will do is to see the charge come from a multiple group of stakeholders, whether they be the conservation community, the forest products industry, individual conservation organizations, and most particularly the federal and state legislatures. Much of the work that we need to focus on will come from policy that's established by our representatives.
And there you go. Sometimes it always comes back to politics. And since you had worked for so many years in Washington, do you find it hard to get our lawmakers to understand and value the resource that we have here along the Great Lakes?
Oh, I think that's correct. I think, and we mentioned this earlier, legislators have to deal with a variety of very complex issues, from international crises to the economic concerns we have nowadays. So many times coming to grips with environmental and forestry issues is not at the top of their list. And I think that, once again, programs like this, discussions with your representative, your senator, can make a difference in terms of the way that people understand the value and the importance of looking at this issue. All
right, Bill, I'm going to ask you to look into your crystal ball. I don't know if you brought it with you today,
I did,
but all right,
did.
Just in case. Okay, so tell me what you think the future of our forests are. What excites you, and what maybe makes you a little nervous?
Well, what excites me is just taking a look at the last 10 or 15 years, and we've seen where we've grown in terms of a systems approach to sustainability. I think that informing the people who love our forests about the forest science that we're involved with, seeing the scientific community, understanding every day more about the intricacies of an ecosystem, a forest ecosystem, that's going to be really exciting. I think we're going to end up with a much more informed public, which will, I think, play a real big role in terms of our healthy forest systems.
Where do you think more work has to be done?
Well, one of the concerns that I have is not directed to forestry, but I think you'd find that the greatest forest loss that we're suffering in all regions of the United States comes from urban sprawl and urban encroachment on wildlands, farmlands, where we're not just talking about over-harvesting. We're talking about permanent conversion of forests to parking lots, to shopping malls, and home construction. So that's what I'm most concerned about. I think we have to get a real handle on how we do that in a sustainable fashion.
And take in consideration our urban planning. All right,
Absolutely.
Bill, thank you so much. Stay right here. He is going to stay with us and field a few questions from the audience in just a few minutes.